Thanks for your patience. Okay, so we are, okay. Now, I don't know if either of you paid attention to this, but in the textbook that we have, and I haven't, yeah, this is the new textbook. I haven't looked at the new one online. No, I did, because that's what I was reading last night when I was reading back through the lesson. The first thing they give you is exercises, and I would do this. In fact, I was going to do it last night, but I was doing this so late that I was tired, and so I did it this morning. So you probably can't see this. I don't know if Joe can.
I could sort of see it. Yeah.
Can you see this?
I just know there's writing. Yeah.
What it tells you to do is to go back to the, I think it's the second chapter of the book, and start with the verbs and take what they're going to teach you here in terms of how to form the imperfect and practice doing this with each one of these. So you're going to have 6 forms for every one of those verbs. And it's good practice. It's that repetition of what are the endings, how do you form an imperfect. So anyway, I'm saying that in advance so I don't forget that at the end of class, but we're going to talk about the imperfect today. So we're going to take off underneath our vocabulary. I'm going to go through this, and you guys can read through this material, but simply when we're talking about the imperfect, we have 2 forms. We have the perfect and the pluperfect, the imperfect and the pluperfect, and they both are built off of the imperfect is built off the present stem. So it's going to take the stem of the verb that you've learned in the present tense. That's what makes this easy. Pluperfect similarly takes the stem of the perfect verb. And so that what shows you is that there's something that these 2 are sharing in common with that other form. Just forget about the pluperfect for the moment, and we're going to do the imperfect in the lesson. I'm just showing you that we don't, until we get like into aorist, we have a secondary tense where the form changes, where it's like with us, where it goes go to went, and so the stem will change. So you can have erkamai becomes elthon. Doesn't look anything like, doesn't sound like you find any form of the stem. That's not true of the imperfect. The imperfect is easier. So the imperfect is going to take the stem of the verb. You're going to add an augment to the beginning. We're going to talk about augments in a bit. And then you're going to add an imperfect ending. And so you simply have for the present, or for the imperfect indicative active form, you're going to just simply have 6 new endings: on, s, and eta, on. And out of those, 2 of them are the same endings that we actually have in the present active indicative, the amen and the eta. And you also notice that the first singular and the third plural have the same ending, which is not really a hard issue, because when you're reading the text, it's going to be really easy to go, oh, it's talking about a crowd of people, so it's not an I. And if you're going to have an I, it's going to be somebody speaking. Paul said, I, da, 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 da. It's going to be listed in the imperfect. And we might hit a couple of examples of that before the end of the day. So you can see the example, and this is really largely right out of our book. With the augment here, we're simply adding an epsilon to the beginning of the word. So in the same way that we form past tense by adding an ed, normally in English, they're putting an augment at the beginning of the stem out there. So you have the examples down there of luo, eluon, elus, elua, and so on. And so the augment is the epsilon. However, we only add that epsilon. Well, we always add the epsilon technically. In the technical sense we are. But you only see the epsilon if you have a consonant. So if the verb's stem starts with a consonant, such as luo starts with a consonant, it's a lambda, then we add an epsilon. If it begins with a vowel, then we are going to heighten those vowels or lengthen those. So if we have an alpha, when you put the A or the alpha, and the epsilon together, we're going to end up with eta. The same thing if you're going to put 2 epsilons together, you're going to get an eta. If you have an epsilon and an omicron together, it's going to lengthen to an omega. So we're getting a lengthened form, a long form of that, vowel.
But we won't see epsilon alpha, we'll see eta.
You're going to see eta. So what they're doing is they're combining those two, and this is what you get out of it. Yes. Okay. And I think you can see that down under the examples, a little ways down the page there, where you can see how you're adding the epsilon, and so on and so forth. So that you're taking the present stem, adding the augment epsilon to that. It stays epsilon. If you have a consonant, if we have a vowel, it's going to lengthen or make long that vowel at the beginning of the word. So a kuo becomes a kuon, a gyro becomes a gyron. You're going to see, actually, and if you read through your Bible and you look at a gyro is to raise. So if you look at passages on the resurrection, a lot of times writers are speaking of it in the past. And so it's going to be common to see a gyro probably as much as you're going to see a gyron in that way. Oneidizo, to insult or ridicule, it's going to become o. You're going to have to really, really emphasize the a versus the o when you're pronouncing those. Oneidizon, it becomes like that. Any questions at this point?
So right there where it says in the cases the augment forms a contraction with the first vowel. So only on vowels, you don't really see that augment of the epsilon. It's just there.
Yes. All you're going to see is the lengthened vowel. That's all you're going to see, or the long form of the vowel. So
when they lengthen that, do they also accent it?
It can, depending on how many consonants you have, it can change the accent.
Because it sounds like, because they're putting emphasis on it, that lengthened sound, it would seem natural or almost like a rule to put a accent on it.
Well, if you look in the list of verbs above there at the kuo, you can see that we have the accent on the upsilon. But when you change the alpha to an eta, then because the eta is long, that accent moves to the left, to the front of the word. So you can see that it is moved. Same thing in a gyro and a gyron.
Now, what about in front of a rough breathing? Is there something on that or no?
There's something on that. Not to my knowledge, that the rough breathing is not going to change that.
Okay.
Now, the other thing that happens is, and they went over this in the book, and just to be clear on this, the book calls when you add a augment to a word that has a consonant, they call that I'm drawing a blank on it. It has to do with a syllable. What you're doing.
Syllabic augments.
Syllabic. I couldn't remember how they changed that into an adjective, is what I was trying to remember.
Right.
The reason it does that is because remember, you have in a verb or in a word in Greek, you have as many consonants as you have vowels or diphthongs. If you have a diphthong like a gyro, you have 3 consonants. You have the epsilon, you have the I, the epsilon iota is a diphthong, and then you have the omega. So there's 3 consonants in there because there's 3 sets of vowels or diphthongs. But if you have a consonant at the beginning and you add an augment, which is going to be a vowel in the beginning, that's adding another consonant. So you go potentially from 3 consonants to syllables. Yes, 3 syllables to 4 syllables. Or luo, you're going to go from 2 syllables to 3 in there, because luo technically would be 2 syllables, one with the omega and then the lambda with the epsilon. Helpful, that is helpful information for accenting. We're not stressing a lot on accenting in our class, but I'm always working myself on trying to do better with accents for the sake of other people that fuss over them. Okay. Now, the next situation that we have is that and we've seen a number of these because we've learned prepositions, and we've seen that if you add prepositions to other words, especially verbs, that you can, change the nature of that verb. So when we have such as ekbalo there, we're going to add the augment, not in front of the accent, but in front of the verb stem. The verb stem is still ball. Okay, it's still ball. And so it's gonna go X, and they've changed the ek in there. They've lengthened it to xi. So we have the epsilon coming between the xi and the stem. Optino becomes, what happens is they change the omicron at the end of apo, and it becomes the epsilon in this case. So apectino, apectinon. So they're adding that again between the apo preposition and the tino, or tine, technically stem. Is this all making sense?
Mhm.
Okay.
May I ask something, or not, or what I see is, I don't know if they're changing the omicron on apo, but it's just part of that rule. If there's two vowels together, you lose that. What is that called? I can't remember what it's called. But it becomes op, and then you still follow the rule because there's a concept of the kappa there, that we have the epsilon in front of that, right? There's a constant following the
There's a consonant following the augment.
right.
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 Okay.
Same thing with the last one there, right? So
Apo.
right, and then you see the eta there on there as the augment. So it's still following that same rule above about the following a vowel, or leading a vowel, or leading a consonant.
That's right. So when you have a vowel there, you can see that the vowel is changing, where
Right.
in the first one, it's two consonants together, the kappa and the beta. You're adding the epsilon, you're just dropping it in between those, but they did make a change then to the kappa in this case, turning to be exbalon.
Because what's that rule again in the past where you have apo and it changes to just op? There's and then usually you have a
contraction.
A contraction, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's following that. It just see that.
It is, and it's fine, and it does that. Remember, if you have, normally that happens when it stands by itself. When you have the word that it follows begins with a
Vowel.
that you
Right.
off, smooth your pronunciation. We don't have that in this case, but it would become that if you add the epsilon between there. Then you'd have apoectino.
Right.
Drop out the omicron.
Yeah. So that's why I think it's following more of that rule of the contraction versus changing the omicron to an epsilon on the second word, for example.
So, any questions on those, on that stuff? Okay. And as I said, I would recommend, before you even move into doing the exercises in the book, I would recommend that you take paper and you practice just writing these paradigms out, these conjugations, for each one of the verbs, just as they suggest. It's, again, I cannot emphasize enough how helpful it is to learn this stuff just by repeating that. And like I said, if you need to, if this sounds tedious, it sounds like you're talking to second graders, but sometimes we adults need that too. Just set a time. Hey, I use this as an example because I was listening about 4 or 5 years ago to a writer, and she said she had become successful, but she struggled with continuing to do her writing. And I know what that's like, because I've got like 3 books that are in various stages that I've been working on. And sometimes I'll go like 3 weeks or 4 weeks without even opening one of them and messing with it. And she said that's what was happening to her. And she said what she ended up doing was discipline herself, that when she would go to her office, after she had her tea in the morning, she would sit down and she would dedicate an hour to doing nothing but focusing on that. She wouldn't answer texts. She wouldn't answer emails. She wouldn't look at the news. She'd just read what she'd written and work on where she was going, and spend an hour. And she goes, that hour might turn into 2 hours, but she disciplined herself to spend time. And I think that that's a good habit. If we're going to try to learn this, is just if you have to, set it on your phone to say, hey, every morning at 9 o'clock, I sit down and I spend 20 minutes or 10 minutes reviewing this stuff, going over it. So practice writing those out. Okay. Now we come down to the I me. The I me does not occur in the aorist tense. I'm pretty sure it doesn't. I need to be careful of this, but I'm pretty sure the only past form we're really going to have of I me is going to be the imperfect. And I think the reason that you have imperfect rather than aorist, because aorist looks at something just kind of as a whole. And a lot of times we say it's punctiliar. It looks at it as an act. And being is not an act. Being is kind of a state of being. It's the way things are. So when I say I am, it's not saying I was or I will be. You're really saying I am. So for that reason, most of the time you're going to have the stative verb I me. It's going to occur in the imperfect. It's going to look at something in the past as it was ongoing. Ongoing in the past, I was being this. And a lot of times we're just going to say I was. But in Greek, they really look at it as something that was kind of a state, an ongoing state in the past. Now, just to kind of point this out, if this is helpful, the endings we have on our imperfect verbs are on SE. And if you look at the forms that we have here, we have amain. We're doing the same thing. We're changing our vowel. We're lengthening our vowel to an eta. We're adding an epsilon, so we're lengthening the vowel to an eta in these cases. But instead of amon, it's a main. So just if that's helpful, that on just it lengthens to an eta in the ending for the first person singular. The ace is just, again, we used to have S with the epsilon sigma, and then we used to have with a movable noon at the end for he, she, or it. But in the stative verb I me, it's going to become in the imperfect ain. And then we have amen and eta for our endings in the imperfect. They're going to become amen and eta. So again, we're just lengthening that epsilon. The last one is the one that's going to be different because it's ason, and there's just I don't have any way to help you understand that one.
There's not a rule here.
Yeah, that one doesn't, because remember the ending for the first singular in imperfect is the same as the third plural. It's both on, but here it totally changes up on us. So it's just going to have to memorize this one as ason. And again, I would encourage you to do the same thing. Take a paper and just practice writing those again and again and again.
Well, in the present indicative, I mean, is I seen, right? So ason kind of goes that way.
You can see it's lengthening those. It's
Right.
lengthening those ending, or the augment is lengthening the beginning vowel. Okay.
Now there was a note on the textbook about amen, that the form in the New Testament is emetha.
Is what?
What?
Emetha,
Oh, emetha?
right? I'm looking at the page in the workbook, page 54 at the bottom, note 3.
In the workbook,
In the book,
textbook. Okay.
textbook, excuse me, textbook. Right?
You said, oh, no, 3. Oh, emetha is often found where, because that would actually make us think that we're talking about a middle or passive, but we don't actually have middle or passive
Right,
form by me.
right.
He's always in the active sense. So they're taking a form that looks like it would be middle or passive, and they're actually treating it as an active, using it that way. So there are some questions about why it does that in those cases.
I
So
have lots of questions about
yeah, why you would have that. In other words, maybe there is a little bit more of a middle sense in a couple of those passages. Okay, so that's the formation of the word. So just remember, find your stem for the present active indicative. Add the augment to the beginning of it. It's always going to be what vowel if the word starts with a consonant? Epsilon.
So on.
Starts with a vowel. What do you do?
Lengthen it.
You lengthen it. And then you're going to add the appropriate ending. On, s, at, and et, on. And as I've said before, you learn to kind of package those in your mind as a set of those 6 to do through those ice, and et, usi, my, tie, met the s, the untie. And now we have on, s, at, and et, on. And so you're learning to move through those packages like that for the sake of helping you identify forms as you're reading the text. Okay, so with that, any comments or questions?
I don't think so.
Okay. So let's go on to the significance of what the imperfect is talking about here. The imperfect is a past tense, but it's a past tense that normally gives us the idea of something that is ongoing in the past, not something not just something that happened. Okay, so he built a house is a lot different than say, hey, when I met him, he was building a house. That would have a different sense.
So would he built a house be an aorist?
Right.
Okay.
And we actually have an example of that in John 2, when Jesus says, tear down this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. And they say 40 and 6 years this temple was built, and they use an aorist tense to describe it was. They just kind of take 46 years and compress it into an act. They just look at it as a singular act versus looking at it something that's an ongoing building process in the past. Okay.
So does aorist tense mean that it's something in the past that's completed?
Not particularly. We will address the aorist. Aorist to some degree is the trickiest to interpret, because the aorist becomes our simple past that we would say, but there's a lot of times the aorist doesn't function as a past. Okay. When you put an aorist with an imperative, when you speak in the aorist imperative, it's like, do it, get it done now. What are you still for? Get that done. You know, that's the idea of the aorist imperative. And yet you're looking at something you're telling a person to do right now in the present time. You're saying that to them. And so aorist has a very, very, let's put it this way, probably of all the tenses, it's the one that grammarians have struggled the most to try to figure out how to define it. And sometimes they say it's the undefined tense. It just has a lot of uses, but the main thing for you to understand, and we're not even at the aorist, but it's just that the aorist kind of looks at an action just from the whole of the action. It doesn't particularly consider progress, doesn't look at any of that. It's just, this is the act in various ways. And that's a very simplified way of explaining an aorist.
It makes sense.
We're looking at the imperfect here. We have a descriptive imperfect that relates a past event as a moving picture. So, you know, we all get this versus when they were writing the New Testament, that we watch movies, and in the movie somebody's telling something and he goes back and he could say, oh, that guy was sleeping. But they could also look at it and they could say, they could look at it and they could do a flashback in a movie and you actually see what was going on in the past. So we kind of get that idea of a moving picture in the past. So a couple of examples they have of the descriptive here, Mark 11:14. They, that is the disciples, were hearing, his disciples were hearing. They were listening. They're just keeping it real short there. So it's looking not just that they heard, but that they were in this process of listening to something at the time. So we're looking at something descriptive of the event that was going on and the way it portrays it. Do you have a question? Or?
Well, I'm just trying to, it's this whole, like, I like rules thing. And so the word is here, but they're translating it listening because it's a descriptive. So we're saying, we're talking about this event that happened in the past. And yes, of course, they were hearing, but we call that listening. So we're saying listening.
I translate listening, but you also can translate hearing. When I did the translation, it says, and his disciples were hearing. They were hearing.
Is there another
It's
word? for
It's just a synonym, right?
I don't think that there is in Greek. I can't think of another word that would be better translated listening. I don't know if either of you ever got this in school, but we always distinguished hearing is that you can be there and you hear stuff, but you're not paying attention. Listen.
I have this conversation with my children every
Whereas listening is like actively paying attention.
Active listening.
And we do have a word, we do have a verb in Greek that means to pay attention to. Okay. So, and Paul uses that a few times. You have that, I think, twice in 1 Timothy chapter 1, a word that people that wanted to pay attention to something other than what they were supposed to be paying attention to. So, but I think there's a little bit difference between paying attention and even listening, because you can pay attention to something and not hear a thing. So, this is out of Luke 15. The next one I have there is Luke 15:16, and this is out of the prodigal son. It says, and he was craving, we have the word lust or to crave. He was craving to be filled with, and I dropped some stuff off for the simplicity of this, from the pods, the pigs, and then we have another imperfect, we're eating. So we've got two things here. He is in the process of craving to be filled from the pods that the pigs were eating, which is kind of the imperfect there, means it's like he's being hungry at the same time that he's watching these pigs eating this food. Going, man, I'd like to just reach it. I can't ever imagine. My
wanting to eat slop.
yeah. So, and I don't know what those pods were. I don't know if you know this. I'm sorry, this is digressing. One of my favorite things is peanut butter. But you may not know this, but here in the United States in the past, before George Washington Carver popularized peanut butter, peanuts and peanut butter were considered pig food. They were considered pig food. And on top of that, they were also considered food that blacks ate, not good white people. That's the way it was. And George Washington Carver popularized it, and we were thankful. I am anyway, because I love it. But I always think that when I look at the pods here, that to be a type of person that everybody else would go on, there's no way I'm going to eat this stuff that these pigs are eating. And he's so hungry, he's thinking, I would like to eat this stuff that right now they're eating. This, I think, part of the illustration of the imperfect tense.
Now, I have a question though on he was craving epithumai. How did he get that ending though? I'm trying to see that on the imperfect active indicative ending for that singular
in that case,
second person.
well, the word we're looking at, is the word eating at the end.
Okay.
Yeah, we're not looking at
Craving.
Yeah,
because I didn't see how the epsilon iota ending falls in that. So that's not one of those then, imperfect active?
it is not.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Then the next sentence down there, again, we're looking at these descriptive that are just really kind of trying to give us a very moving picture, very vivid here. And Paul says that you were being, there's the imperfect form. If you just look back right up there where we were just in that list right up above there on the last page, you were being slaves of the sin, and we say sin nature for clarity, for helping people. But this is what you were being. This is the way your life was prior to salvation. You didn't have any. This is why this verse is actually really practical on another side from the main point Paul's making, and this is why I think as Christians I don't expect more out of the unsaved world, because they don't have any option other than to serve their sin nature. Anyway, that's a doctrinal application, not Greek particularly. Then the next illustrations that they give us, they give the repeated or iterative imperfect. So we have an action that's repeated or continual action in past. So 1 Corinthians 10:4 is talking about Israel, and we just use the one word, says they drank, and then the rest of the text is from the same spiritual rock. Well, they weren't drinking constantly because they're moving around in the wilderness. But as they're moving around, when they're thirsty, they go and fill their water jugs, their everything from this same thing. So they're drinking from this on a regular basis. You know, you could say, if I were to use this, I would say I drink from the tap at my house. Well, I'm not. If I use the imperfect and you thought, well, you're constantly drinking there, that would give the impression all day long I stand at the faucet and I'm just constantly drinking water. But an iterative or repeated means that's a regular thing that I'm doing. I regularly, when I'm thirsty, go and get water from the tap. Okay. That makes sense?
Yes.
Okay. So it is ongoing, but there's breaks in it, obviously, because it's not an action that you're just doing absolutely all the time. And we have another one here in Matthew 13. It says, and apart from a parable, he was saying nothing to them. Okay. And we have again, this is that other ending. And I got to get back to you on this one, Joe. This particular form. Oh, okay. I just figured this out. With epithumai up there. I think that is an imperfect, because I was looking at the ending, because we have the same thing with elalai down here. And this is, don't worry about it right now, but this is a contract verb. So it's not lalo, it's laleo. It's an epsilon omicron ending. And so it changes the way, it forms the ending of the verb. Okay, anyway. So just forget that, but we're illustrating the point. We're just illustrating.
So that means, that tells you there's another, so all it's telling us, there's something that's still in the imperfect active indicative that we haven't seen here as a form. It's
not following our rule because it's a different type of verb at this time.
Okay.
Contract verb. But it says, but apart from a parable, he was saying nothing to them. Well, Jesus talked with lots of people, lots of times. But what it's saying is when he was teaching with these particular crowds, he always, on a regular basis, whenever that was, he taught this day, maybe he takes a day off and he's doing something else. And then on the following day, then he does. So whenever he's talking with them in terms of teaching, he was always speaking to them in a parable.
So would you say on the English translation of an imperfect active indicative would be either have, depending on the person, of course, was or were?
Right. Yes.
Okay.
Exactly.
And would the aorist be like he craved or he?
Right. Yeah.
That's an aorist. Okay. Or he said.
Right.
Is that aorist?
He said, yeah, that would be versus he was saying, which would be emphasizing an imperfect tense.
Okay.
Okay. And then the inceptive, and I didn't highlight the word inceptive there, but the inceptive imperfect emphasizes the beginning of a continuous action in the past. And I see this. I personally have some questions about this because there's some passages I would maybe just interpret them a little bit different or read them a little bit differently. But you're going to read in your English Bibles, you're going to read, he began teaching. And I was comparing this. So I was looking up some of these and I was comparing them with my English text. And yeah, they put the word began in there, but there is no word began in the Greek text. That's a translator's interpretation that this was something that he began to do. He sat down, I think in Matthew 5:2, he sat down, his disciples came to him and he sat down and began teaching them. I don't even think we need to say began teaching them. We could say, and he was ongoing teaching them in this particular setting. But began, they're trying to say he hadn't been doing this until they came in and sat down and then he began doing it. Same thing in Acts 3:8, where we have the man that's lame. This is the time where Peter and John say, silver and gold we don't have, but what we have we give to you. In the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, rise up and walk. And he gets up and they say he began walking. He hadn't been walking in the past. And again, and it's peripateo. So again, this is a contract verb, which is why that ending is getting a little bit messed up for us, messing us up on these things that they're giving.
So would it be safe to say that to identify an inceptive would probably be because of context leading up to
Yeah.
it?
Oh, all of these things, each one of these is context. How do you know it's repeated? By context, you know that they were not continually drinking from this. You know that Jesus wasn't continually talking all the time, always in a parable, in all these things. And sometimes he just was carrying on a straightforward conversation with maybe one of his disciples. But with these crowds that he's talking to, he was always doing this. Okay.
So I'm guessing we're gonna see it in context and it's gonna make more sense, but I'm not understanding, I'm not seeing how we're gonna know the difference between descriptive, repeated, and
It
cherry.
has to be context leading up to it. That's the only way I can see.
Right. And the reason they're doing this is because if you understand that something is an ongoing activity, you would have somebody that is going to be doggedly literal. And so they're going to come and say that they were drinking from the same spiritual rock. And then they would doggedly literal would say that meant that those people never left that rock. They spent 24 hours a day at that rock with their mouth in the water, drinking the water that was pouring out of that fountain. And we know that that's not what it meant. We get that, you know.
Hey, Robin, haven't you ever been watching a movie? I know I do it with my wife all the time. I'm big into context. And so I'll cut into the middle of the movie, or I went out to get something and there was a commercial. And I come and say, I need to replay that so I know what they're talking about, even though I understood what was being said, but I want to know in what context.
Right, yes.
So I think that's the same thing for language, you know.
So, and there are other forms. I can guarantee you there are other ways. They're giving you, what they're doing is they're giving you probably three of the most common ways that you're going to encounter the imperfect, and they're giving this to you so that when you look at these imperfects, when you look at them and you go, wow, how would I understand that? And what's going on there, that you can see, well, there was different ways of understanding something that was ongoing on the past. It was something that happened on a regular basis. It was something that was absolutely constant at a moment in time. I had, I'm just going to trying to watch the clock and respect your time. But if I go to Mark, I think this is, or no, Mark 8. Go to Mark 8, Matthew 8. I put down some others. I'm a person that I like to see examples of stuff. It helps me, and it helps solidify stuff in my mind. In verse 23, it says, was going down into the boat, and his disciples followed him. There came to be a great shaking, or we'd probably say a great storm in the sea, so that the boat was being overflowed and by the waves. He, the end of verse 24, he was sleeping. And it's Cthulhu. So it's an ending that kind of messes up our ending, but instead of an on, it has the epsilon in the ending there. But he's sleeping. So Cthulhu in there, this idea of to sleep, and it's imperfect. It's just saying, while this storm's going on. So the first part saying, there's a storm going on. And Jesus didn't say he slept. The imperfect is making it vivid. And he's just sleeping away through the middle of the storm. He's not stressed by it. Doesn't bother him. And so the imperfect really, even though it's, for however long this happened during this storm. I mean, the storm wasn't going on all the time he's with the disciples, and it wasn't every time he crossed the sea with these guys, but it was on this occasion, and he's just sleeping. He's zonked out. And so the imperfect is really adding some vividness to this situation that he finds himself in.
So I was looking at the, I don't know, they had it as was asleep in the NASB.
Yeah, and see,
they still call it a imperfect active indicative, but they translate as was asleep.
Yeah,
that wrong?
I think it misses the punch
right.
that imperfect brings to that text. go to Matthew 3 and verse 6, here's an example of an iterative. Going to verse 5, it says, and then Jerusalem and all of Judea were going out to him, and all of the surrounding countryside of the Jordan, and they were being baptized in the Jordan River by him, confessing out their sins. But as they were being baptized, this is an imperfect, it's a different form, but we're just using it to illustrate the nature of the imperfect here is all we're trying to do. Don't worry about the form right now, because this is a form we haven't come to yet.
Yeah.
But they're being baptized, and the significance of that is John's not baptizing 24 hours a day out there in the Jordan. This guy has to go and sit down and eat and sleep sometimes. But what it's saying is, as he's preaching out there by the Jordan, that these different people were coming out just on a regular basis. This is happening. They keep coming out, and they keep coming out, and they keep coming out. And the imperfect is laying its emphasis on the fact that this was just an ongoing situation out there. But it's not 24 hours a day, 7 days a week type of situation. I think we all get that. We realize that just doesn't work. Okay. And what was I had one more that I was gonna. This is Matthew 26. Matthew 26, 55. Just trying to think if this is the one I wanted. This is kind of what they call, this is what they call a customary. In other words, it's something in which I could say that last one that was iterative also could be considered somewhat customary, but this is talking about a person's habit. But 55, Matthew 26, 55, and it says, and in that very hour, then Jesus said to the crowd, have you, let's see, have you come out upon a thief? Oh, there it is, upon a thief with swords and with clubs to seize me. He says, every day. It says, I was sitting in the temple teaching, and you did not seize me there. And it's that word, every day I was sitting. I was sitting every day in the temple. You guys never seized me there. What's the deal? So I was up there, Now was Jesus just constantly sitting in the temple all the time? No, but it was customary. It was a regular thing for them to find Jesus sitting up there in the temple, and they could have seized him at any time. But when do they do it? They come by cover of night, out in a garden, out away from the city to take him. I think that's kind of his point. He's contrasting it to, you guys could have taken me when it was in the middle of the day, right up there at the temple. Would have been easy, right there. And so he's using an imperfect there to kind of say something that this was a regular, customary habit of him to sit up there and teach when he was down there in Jerusalem. And we know that from, if you just go back and read the preceding chapters, you can see that he was up there. In fact, I'm not for sure if it's in Matthew, it might be over in Luke, where the writer, Matthew or Luke, whoever's writing, says that this was Jesus' habit. Spent the night out in the field sleeping, and then would come in and be up at the temple teaching during the day, and then at night go back out there, and then come back into town with his disciples during the day and preach the thing. And it kind of indicates that this was something that he was doing on a regular basis. And I didn't pull that one up for today. That just I remember that from reading through that in the past. So anyway, so imperfect, different ways of you're looking at something in the past, but you're looking at something that was ongoing. And as we're looking at it ongoing in the past, there's different ways of understanding it. Like we said, look at something.
I'm seeing kind of a different, instead of in the last one, when you went to Matthew 3:6, that ebautizanto, that's an imperfect because it's had the was or the were. But when I see the word being something, it almost tells me there's passive, there's an agent happening there to act on a subject or something. So wouldn't that be an imperfect, not active, but an imperfect passive?
You have being, and you translate.
Yeah, like they were being baptized. That's an imperfect.
Like that. Because that's actually a combination of two words, because you're looking at were being. So you've got that, and that's the thing that actually gives it the passive sense.
Right. That's what I was thinking.
You can have being without it being passive. But yeah, in that case, that gives a passive sense. So. Okay, so so go ahead and start working on the exercise in the workbook, but I would start working on writing out those conjugations for all those verbs beginning back, I think, in chapter 2, and writing these out. I think that you'd find that to be helpful. So
Yeah, that's a good idea.